Now, training is obviously a really important part of how animals, our equines, are cared for. And in this regard, our understanding of training is growing all the time. I'm sure many of you in the room are coaches, and you have been trained and you have a very good understanding of what it means and what responsibility you have for the horses and riders under your care and training. And you will recognise that shortcuts very rarely do work when it comes to our horses. We need time and we need patience. And when we find the difficult horse, there isn't, in my book, a naughty horse. A horse is naughty or behaves badly either because of the way it's been trained in its past or because it has unresolved pain. And there's some research done at the Animal Health Trust in the UK a couple of years ago, and that looked at sport horses, a population of sport horses, all of whom are competing, some up to 5-star level. 47% of those horses were lame. Some of them very mildly lame, but lame all the same. That means 47% of sport horses have unresolved pain, and the likelihood of those animals showing poor behaviour is significantly increased as a result. We also need to recognise that we understand more and more about equine learning. And so some of you, I'm sure, will have heard about positive and negative reinforcement and punishment. And traditionally, equine training has been very much based around negative reinforcement. You put the leg aid on, the horse does what you want, you take the leg aid off. That is negative reinforcement. And it still has a really important part to play in how we train our horses. But the focus, without doubt, needs to move more on to positive reinforcement. And I don't know if you've seen horses that are difficult to load, and the use of clicker training to improve how quickly, or a needle shy horse, it's extraordinary. In 20 minutes you can get a horse that would take you hours to load, and they will walk on to that box. It's our understanding of how horses learn that's so important. Now, obviously racing has its own sort of mantra and Bible around equine welfare. For horse sport more generally, it's the FEI Code of Conduct. And it couldn't be clearer. The welfare of the horse can never and should never be subordinated to competitive or commercial influences. And when riders get that wrong, the implications can be profound. Some of you will know Ollie Townend, the eventer, who 2 years ago, I think, had 2 horses going around cross country at Badminton, and on both he was done for overuse of the whip on horses that were tired coming home. That was bad enough because it wasn't a good spectacle. What was even worse was the interview he gave immediately getting off his horse, where he said, I can ride good and I can ride ugly. And that was his answer to being questioned whether he did in fact overuse the whip. Now, the one key take home of that story is when adrenaline is running around your bodies, never talk to the press. Our understanding, a lot of you will have heard, less so in the racing world, but certainly in the horse sport world, the issue of tight nosebands. It's something that very much has been a focus for the sector, for the sport and for the media. But actually, again, research coming out of the Animal Health Trust, of course, over tight nosebands are a welfare issue, there's no doubt about that. But actually, when you look at where the pressure points are on a horse's bridle, is actually the pole pressure and the pressure down the cheeks, where you have the main nerve supplies that are equally, if not more important. So it's all very well being infatuated by tight nosebands, but actually it's our bridle fit that needs to be far more the focus, as much as it is with saddle fit. And therefore it's a really good example of where you can get so blinkered and focused around one particular issue, and you actually forget, from a welfare perspective, what really matters. I've already talked about the whip, and it is, as I said, something that culturally across the world there are different views on it. And for sure, racing, and certainly in British racing, a padded whip has been used. They've introduced stiffer penalties for jockeys that overuse it. But yet still, in British racing, there are over 600 whip penalties a year. And worse still, over the last 2 or 3 years, a lot of the big races have been won by jockeys that broke the whip rules. And if you're trying to convince the great public that is fair, you can break the rules but still win the race, then you've got another thing coming. People just simply don't understand that. In any other basis, if you break the rules, you get disqualified. Now, obviously within racing, there's the whole betting scenario that goes with it. But for sure, we believe that the whip penalty system in many racing jurisdictions is not fit for purpose. So, as we've mentioned already, when animals come to the end of their elite sporting life, then they will go on to a second, a third, a fourth career. What's extraordinary about horses is the fact that we utilise them in society today in so many different ways, as a sporting animal, as a leisure animal, as a farm animal, as a working animal, but increasingly in therapy and in many other areas of work. And what's extraordinary is a horse can fulfil each and every one of those functions during their lifetime. And so we need to make sure that horses that are coming off the racetrack, that are coming out of elite sport, have got a second home and second career to go to. Now, we can do that for most of the equines that are coming out of the sport, but certainly not all of them. And we do recognise that a horse that has been trained to be a 5-star eventer or a racehorse to win grade 1s, that they are highly strung animals, and you can't simply put them into a new home and expect them to get on with it. There is a level of competence that we need to make sure that new owners and new carers and new riders have, because if we don't get that right, then things can go very wrong. And as I've already said, it doesn't matter how long a horse has been a sport horse for, the great public will always think it's a sport horse. As I mentioned at the beginning, World Horse Welfare has considerable experience around the rehoming of animals. And a lot of those we can rehome as ridden animals, as driven animals, and everything in between. And that's a wonderful, obviously the transition between the two careers is really important. But equally, we do rehome a lot of companion animals. But I would certainly stress that should never be viewed as the easy option. And certainly within the racing world, the idea of retirement farms is something I know has a lot of resonance with some. I would suggest that you proceed with extreme caution, because it's not just about quantity of life, it is about the quality of life. And that has to be the key driver in the decision making of the future of the horses in our care. And then the most difficult discussion of all, an end of life, because it is the fundamental role of every animal owner, but certainly every horse owner, to give their horse a good life and a good death. And if we are not doing that, then we are failing under our responsibility to care for those animals. It is and never will be, it isn't and never will be an easy decision. But nevertheless, it's one that we all need to be prepared for. And that's why for World Horse Welfare, we run an initiative called Just In Case. And that's all about getting owners to understand and make decisions about the end of life for the animals in their care, where animals are fit and healthy. Because it's very difficult to decide what you're going to do. Are you going to have it shot or injected? What about insurance? What are you going to do with the body, the carcass, once it's been euthanized? Those kinds of decisions are very difficult to make when you are understandably in a very emotional state, when you've decided for whatever reason that your horse needs to be put to sleep. So it is really important that we do those things early and make a plan for that. And of course, across the world, our ability in Australia and the UK, we are very fortunate that we have the equipment, that are either free bullets or drugs. We have the competent personnel that through vets or knackermen to be able to carry that out in a humane way. And what we need to ensure that it is never inhumane. And of course, equally, we know that across the world, there are different cultures, there are different religions, and people's approach to euthanasia can be quite sensitive. But what I do know, having been around the world, and we've had experience of all major religions, is the fact that there isn't a single religion that would actively promote animal neglect due to keeping an animal alive longer than it should be. One of the key messages today, and I know will be difficult for some of you to hear, especially from someone who works for an equine welfare organisation, is that the outcome of the ABC programme last year shouldn't necessarily be that slaughter should be banned. Horses shouldn't be slaughtered for human consumption. That is a decision that each of us will make individually about whether we want to send our animal to the slaughterhouse or not. But what is key is clearly inhumane slaughter is completely unacceptable. But there are standards for slaughtering animals, for slaughtering equines, through the OIE, and the EU has standards for slaughtering animals. And we need to ensure that those standards are rigorously enforced. If we do that, then we are meeting the obligations to our horses. But as I say, that is not something that each of us will want to make, and indeed many in this room probably won't. So on one level, when we talk about unacceptable choices, as I said, we can never prioritise quantity of life over quality. We never, and it's so easy to kick the can down the road. There's something slightly wrong with your animal, so you'll sell it on or you'll rehome it. The probability of an animal with a problem being sold on ending up in a perilous state is significantly increased. We know that, we see it time and time again. And as I already said, we need to be very careful that we match the horses to the homes that we are sending them to. So that's on one side of the scale. On the other side of the scale, we can never just be a sector that sends all animals that come off the racetrack, come off the sport track, and send them for euthanasia, because that again is equally not fulfilling our responsibilities to them. So to bring this section to a close, I think it is really important in everything we do, from how we care for animals, how we breed them, how we manage them, how we retire them, and certainly in the end of their life, we need to be challenging the way we're doing that. And I think you can see that in the racing world. I would certainly see we need to be challenging the routine interventions, wind operations to name but one. But both in the horse sport and the racing world, how often and regularly we are medicating joints. Those are two specific examples, I would say, that I think, if hand on heart, if we're having to do that, so having to medicate joints to be able to get horses through the sporting day, then there's something wrong with the sporting day. So to come to a conclusion, I think a great challenge for us is to communicate the narrative, the story about horse sport, because that, in all honesty, is what we're getting so wrong, in my view, at the moment. And I think hopefully what we've talked about today, about extolling the value of the horse-human partnership, and what we mean by that is a partnership. It's give and take between rider and horse. And I think when you talk about the activists, you talk about the people who want to ban horse racing and ban horse sport, they seem, many, not all, have this view that horses should run on the prairie and live at one with nature. Now, we know that nature can be a right nasty little thing, so it's not necessarily that we can ever have our horses living at one with nature and being happy. When we bring them in, when we domesticate them, when we use them for horse sport, it is a balance, it is give and take. There isn't perfection, but there certainly is good practice, and there certainly is better practice than we sometimes currently do. I think equally it's really important that we look through a different lens when we're talking about horse sport and when we're communicating about it, because too often we are looking at it from a horse owner, a horse rider, a horse trainer's point of view. But actually we need to look at it from the general public. And on one level, on one side here, you've got the sort of the diehards within the horse world who think nothing should change. On the other side, you've got activists who want to ban everything. But the vast majority of the people are either agnostic or ambivalent about horse sport. And so we need to be thinking the way they think in terms of how we're caring for our horses. And that's why we can never talk about just doing the minimum. British racing had an initiative called A Horse Comes First, which over the years has done some really good stuff about sort of focusing on equine welfare. But the horse comes first, as a part of the general public's concerned, they'll think, well, of course it should come first. You're using it, you're putting it at risk. Of course it should come first. What else are you doing? There's quite rightly a focus in racing on catastrophic injury and fatality. Horses, we know, are very good at injuring themselves in the field, and indeed some research done at Liverpool University not long ago shows that actually horses are most likely to injure themselves in the field compared to any other pastime or sports activity. But nevertheless, we need to recognise that when they're going around a 5-star eventing cross-country course, when they're being raced over 5 furlongs, the risks those horses are put up against are considerably more than they are in the paddock. So risk is never going to go away, and so we are going to have bad days. And so what we need to be as a sector, as a sport, is to, if we've been able to justify and tell that story about what horse sport is all about and the care and love that horses have and the enjoyment they get out of it, then we will be able to weather the storm of the inevitable bad days that we have, because we know there will also be good days. And as well as avoiding the negative, I think as a sport we need to be better at promoting the good days and being able to get people to understand what that does really mean. Within the horse world, within the racing and the sports world, we need to recognise that actually the way we can make a real impact to far more horses is not just about the elite, because there's not many horses there. Most horses are at a local show every weekend, and those people will look up to what are the leaders of the horse sport. Well, so if Ollie Townend is going to overuse the whip regularly, that is probably going to have an impact on what local events and local riders do. So we need to really make sure that we have got ambassadors for the sport that are really going to help us cultivate that social license, because what we need to recognise is that we all have a responsibility to cultivate that social license. So where do we go? We certainly need to invest in further research. Many of you will say, and I've certainly said, that my horse loves going for a ride, going around a cross-country course, doing whatever. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, whilst that might be our innate horsemanship talking to us, actually justifying that to the great public is somewhat more challenging. And so I think we do need to look at what the benefits are to horses through that partnership in horse sport. And as I say, it is something that we need to get everyone to understand, that they have a responsibility, that unless we do cultivate that social license, then the future of our sport is going to be at grave risk. So in summary, social license, call it what you want, but we need to be seen to be doing the right thing by our horses as well as doing the right things, and it's a collective responsibility that we all have. The understanding of equine welfare is changing, and therefore all stages of how we look and care and retire and euthanize our horses, we need to be challenging the way we're doing it. And it is a lifetime commitment, and we need to recognise that and be better at making sure that animals that come off the racetrack stop the elite sport, that we have got a better career path for those animals for as long as they live. And above all, we need to make sure that the decision making that we do is based on quality of life and not quantity, because it's not a win at all cost mentality. It has to be done what is right for the horse. If we get that right, then I believe that horse sport will thrive for many decades to come. If we don't, we will lose it altogether. Thank you very much.